Hello again. Today's lecture is about implicitness and wholeness of the text. Let's start. Language has two levels of expressing thoughts, explicit and implicit. The explicit is what has its own complete immediate verbal expression. The implicit is what has no such verbal expression, but is suggested, expressed, and comprehended by the addressee with the help of the explicit as well as the context, linguistic and pragmatic situations and other factors. Therefore, we can say that the explicit has its own expression and the implicit has not. They both have their own expression, but their kinds are different. The first one is direct and immediate, and the second one is indirect and hidden. The explicit and implicit are, in certain sense, two opposite forms of expressing thoughts. When we say that the implicit has no complete verbal expression of its own, in fact, it means that it has incomplete partial verbal expression or no such expression at all. The first man to pay attention to the problem of the implicit was Aristotle. At present time, the implicit is researched from the position of logic, philosophy, psychology, and literary criticism. In the linguistic literature, the problem of the implicit was touched upon by Galperin, Kukharenko, Arnold, and others. Implicitness is often identified with the concepts of subtext, implication, suggested meaning. Implicitness of the text is a concept of structural semantic character. The implicit level has its own structural unit and implicate. Among the most widespread types of implicates in belles lettres text, we distinguish the following. The first one, an implicate title. It expresses in a concentrated form the main idea or theme of a literary production and requires for its realization the macro context of the whole work. An implicit title is a framing side requiring obligatory conclusive consideration after reading the complete literary text. It increments the volume of its meaning at the expense of the multitude of contextual meaning. The context meaning of the title at the entrance into the text never coincides with its meaning as they exist from the text. Thus, the name of the story by Ernest Hemingway in another country possesses an implicit character and its meaning is revealed only retrospectively after reading the whole work. The next, implication of precedence. It denotes such compositional structure of a literary text which gives the reader an impression that he is a witness of some continued story and the preceding events, facts, and personages are supposed to be familiar. Implication of precedence is realized with the help of such implicates the initial defined article opening the text. Initial usage of personal and demonstrative pronouns and other systematic elements, producing the impression of beginning from the middle, increasing the dynamism of narration and deep hidden tension. As an illustration of the implication of precedence, we'll take the first sentence from the above-mentioned story Ernest Hemingway. In the fall, the war was always there. But we didn't go to it anymore, which introduces the reader deep into the story. The next level, an implicit detail. This term unites a multitude of implicates which mark the external characteristics of a phenomenon, intimating its deep-lying meaning. Thus, in a story by Ernest Hemingway, in another country, which is saturated by implicit details, one of the most significant for the correct understanding of the idea is the following: over the medical machines for the treatment of mutilated joints of the war invalids, the doctor hung photographs which were to inspire the patients with optimism and belief in the restoration of the lost functions. But the major only looked out of the window. Adequate interpretation of the text depends on the correct decoding of this implicate. The analysis shows that the major paid no attention to the photographs because he didn't believe in the beneficial effect of the machines. He regularly came to the hospital not so much for the treatment, but for keeping company with other invalids, which gave him relief, particularly when he was depressed by this personal grief. He had just buried his wife. Kinds of implicitness deliberately introduced into the text by the author, an object of the interpreter's attention. They are consciously intended for the interpreter's, reader's consideration. The next one is about undeliberate and occasional. Implicates according to the degree of their significance, intensify and importance. It is rational to distinguish 5 degrees of implicates: superficial, trite, local, deep, concentrous, and dark. Superficial implicates realize the principle of language economy in speech. It is one of the effective ways and mechanisms of this principle in action. It embraces all kinds of elliptic utterances such as, "Are you going to the cinema?" "Yes, I do." It implied. Unfinished sentences, aposiopesis, breaks in the narrative, and etc. Everybody went to the hospital except. This type of implicitness can be easily explicated and doesn't need special decoding. The missing parts are restored in a semi-automatic way. Implicates of the second degree, trite implicates, include some trivial stylistic devices and expressive means, dead epithets, metaphors, similes, hyperboles, such as, "The doctor said that will all pass. You are a fortunate young man. You will play football again like a champion." Ernest Hemingway, in another country, implicates of the third degree, local, of medium intensity, are rather significant for the correct understanding of a text, bounded by the frame of the given implicate. Thus, in the same story by Ernest Hemingway, after the description of a cold autumn day in a foreign city with an insistent repetition of a word cold, there appears an implicate, a bridge on which a woman sells roasted chestnuts. It was warm, standing in front of her charcoal fire, and the chestnuts were warm afterward in your pocket. The lexical repetition of the word warm is not fortuitous. It serves as the implicate, which by contrast emphasizes the cold of the windy autumn day described in the previous paragraph. The fourth degree implicates deep laid, concentrates, require maximum attention from the reader because its correct decoding is significant for the understanding not only of the given implicate, but also the entire literary work taken as a whole, of its primary theme, of its main idea, of those things for the sake of which the literary text was created, such as the deep implicates in Ernest Hemingway's story, Cat in the Rain, a symbol of loneliness, homelessness, and dissatisfaction with wandering life. The Protagonist's phrase about the obsessive desire to have long hair in the continuation of the theme about her striving for settled life, protection, and also a horse and home. The fifth deep, dark implicates require from the reader not only the knowledge of the given work, but also the acquaintance with the history of its creation, with the historic situation, with the biography of the writer and other productions by the same author. Dark implicates acquire some additional language competence, culture, and erudition for its understanding. For example, the people hated us because we were officers, and from the wine shop someone called out a basso glyphicially as we passed. Ernest Hemingway in another country, the greater is the linguo-gnoseological competence of the interpret, his background knowledge, general culture, philological erudition. The more deep strata of implicitness will be revealed to him in reading a Belles Lettres text. Wholeness of the text in modern linguistics, the wholeness of the text, the close interconnection of its constituents has got the name of text coherence, from Latin coherences, striking together, well knit. It's also metaphorically conveyed by the molecular physics term cohesion, attraction of the particles to each other, tendency to remain united. The text wholeness, the organic hitching of its parts, is inherent both to separate spans of the text and to the entire speech production, separate spans into which is the text, the fractionate are joined together, preserving the unity, totality of the literary work, ensuring consecutiveness, continuum of the related events, facts, and actions. Between the described events, there must be, as it known, some succession, some connection, which is true, is not always expressed by the verbal system of the language means conjunctions, by conjunctional phrases, participle phrases, and etc. Moreover, this very system was worked out according to the connections observed inside a sentence, its parts and between its clauses, in particular between principal and subordinate clauses. However, analyzing texts, we see that its separate parts sometimes placed at a considerable distance from each other, turn out to be connected in a greater or less degree, while means the connection don't always coincide with traditional ones. For designating textual forms of connection, it's expedient to use the term cohesion, which has recently came into linguistic use. Consequently, cohesion denotes special kinds of connection, ensuring continuum, logical consistency, interdependence of separate communications, facts, and actions. This means of cohesion in the text can be classified according to the different traits besides traditionally graphic means. Performing the text-forming function, they can be divided into logical, associative, image-forming, composition, structural, stylistic, and rhythm-creating. The traditional grammatical means embrace all conjunctions and conjunctional words of the type, for example, as, since, therefore, that's why, because, however. In this connection, both and as well as all deictic means, participle phrases, all these means are called traditionally grammatical means because they are already described as means of connection between separate sentences and clauses. The means of connection between much longer spans, syntactical wholes, paragraphs, chapters are called logical. Such forms of cohesion also include the following means of enumeration. In the first place, in the second place, graphic means or means dismembering parts of the utterance by figures, such adverbs as soon as, a few days, weeks, years, later, when, being temporal parameters of communication hitch together separate events, imparting authenticity to them. The same function is performed by the following words: not far from, opposite, behind, under, above, next to, in the distance, close by, etc., which are special parameters of communication. The enumerated means of the cohesion are considered logical because they fit the logic philosophic concepts. The concepts of consistency, temporal, spatial, cause and effect relations. These means are easily recognized and therefore don't detain the reader's attention. It's just in logical means of cohesion that we observe our intersection of grammatical and textual forms of connection. Connecting separate spans of the text into one exaggerate whole into a speech production. The grammatical means acquire the status of textual means acquire the status of cohesion. Naturally, in this process of connective means don't lose their system properties completely. That's why we can say that in logic connectives, we observe simultaneous realization of two functions, grammatical and text forming. The basis of the next kind of cohesion, associative, is formed by other peculiarities of text structure, such as retrospection, connotation, subjective evaluative modality. The verbal signals of associative cohesion are such introductory phrases as suddenly it occurred to him, that reminded him of, and etc. Associative cohesion is also elusive. However, it sometimes determines the connection between the described phenomena, the connection which is very important for understanding the content conceptual information of the literary work. It's necessary to point out that associations in literary works don't appear accidentally, spontaneously. They appear as a result of imaginative, creative process in which remote nations, which are not connected by the logical means of cohesion, acquire quite clear connections. Associative means of cohesion are typical mainly of imaginative literature. It requires some creative re-examination of connections between phenomena. Here we can cite the following words by Wordsworth to find affinities in objects in which no brotherhood exists for passive minds. It means that it's not easy to find similarity in objects without straining one's mind. The compositional structural forms of cohesion include, first of all, such forms which break consistency and logical organization of the communication by all kinds of digressions, insertions, temporal or spatial descriptions of phenomena, events, actions not immediately connected with the main theme or plot of narration. Such violations interrupting the main line of narration sometimes constitute the second plane of communication. The compositional structural forms of hitching remind of the semblance of cinema sequences into complete films when some recollections second plans burst into the consistently connected stills. In every case of compositional structural cohesion, we can mentally imagine words and expressions which could logically connect the disjointed pieces of narration, for instance, digressing from the theme of the account, passing over the second line in the narration. That reminds me of a parallel case simultaneously with this. At the same time, in another place, we can detect similarity of the events and etc. Stylistic and rhythm creating forms of cohesion in many cases interlace. As above mentioned, forms also do. By the way, stylistic forms of cohesion are revealed in such organization of the text, in which stylistic peculiarities successive recur in the structure of syntactic wholes and paragraph structural identity always supposes a certain degree of semantic affinity. If in one paragraph of the text we find the structure in which events develop from cause to effect, then a similar development to the structure in the second or third paragraphs of the text or extract will constitute a case of stylistic cohesion. The same can be said about the usage of partial parallelism, about anaphors in two or more spans of the text. Most frequently, such means of cohesion is realized by the device of parallelism, by the identity of structures in sentences, syntactical wholes of paragraphs, such identity of structures in perceived and only at the contact disposition of the text spans with a given structure. Although sometimes identity can be observed even at the distant realization of parallelism, in cases of distant disposition of stylistic devices, cohesion is traced with the help of the statistic methods. The most ordinary case of stylistic cohesion is the usage of chiasmus, when the sequence of sentences in one syntactical whole paragraph is inverted with regard to the preceding or succeeding. Sometimes this device is realized in much larger spans of utterances. Thus, if in one span the unfolding of communication goes from cause to effect, and it's the next span from effect to cause, then we deal with chiasmus from the stylistic cohesion. These forms of cohesion also include recurrent usage of one and the same stylistic device, simile, allusion, metaphor, if its basis is identical and the forms of realization are different. Creating forms of cohesion are hardest for perception. They chiefly belong to poetry. Such phenomena as meter and rhyme serve not only purposes predetermined for them by the very form of poetic works, but act as means of cohesion. The rhythm-creating form of cohesion is almost elusive in prosaic works, since the rhythm of prosaic refers to such categories about which we say it's inexplicable, but it's felt. Yet, if the number of successive spans, we can see certain identical syntactic structures, their rhythmic organization can be recognized as a form of cohesion. The concept of wholeness of a literary work is closely connected with such concepts as integration and completeness of the text. Integration from Latin integro, making up as a whole, making entire, integral, in divided whole according to the definition, is a concept belonging to the theory of systems and denoting a combination of separate components parts into a whole, as well as the process leading to this state. It's necessary to draw a demarcating line between cohesion and integration. These concepts are mutually stipulated, but they are different from the point of view of their forms and means of expression. Cohesion represents forms of connection, grammatical, semantic, and lexical, between separate parts of the text, defining transition from one context variety segmentation of the text to another. Integration represents unification of all parts of the text for the sake of achieving its wholeness. Integration can be realized by cohesion means, but can also be based on associative and presuppositional relations. Cohesion is a category of the logical plane, integration rather of the psychological plane. Cohesion is linear, integration is virtual. Thank you for your attention. Please, if you liked my video, subscribe my channel. Bye.